Hi, I'm Paige. Welcome back to my kitchen. You're watching the next episode of Doughing It with Paigey. Today we are making the Country Raisin and Walnut Loaf from the cookbook Bread Baking for Beginners by Bonnie Ohara. Now I'm super excited to try this recipe because we're actually trying a couple of new techniques. First off, we will be incorporating whole wheat flour for the first time so far in the book. We will also be incorporating dried fruits and nuts into our dough. That can be a little bit intimidating, but hopefully this video is helpful for you if you're trying this recipe at home. Now this recipe actually calls for raisins, and I won't be using raisins today because I'm not a huge fan of them. I'm actually going to be using dried cranberries. In the recipe, the author says that her favorite dried fruit to incorporate are dried cherries, so feel free to use whatever dried fruit you like. Now, if you're not a huge fan of walnuts, you can obviously leave those out altogether. If you prefer pecans over walnuts, that would be a good incorporation in this recipe as well. We're going to start off by weighing out our all-purpose flour, a little bit of whole wheat flour, water, salt, and yeast. While my scale is out, I'm going to go ahead and weigh out my cranberries and walnuts as well. I also want to note that I am halving this recipe today. This recipe makes 2 loaves and I'm only looking to make 1, so I cut all of my ingredients in half. Now let's go ahead and start mixing our dough. We're going to start off by pouring the yeast directly on top of the water and mixing that until it's nice and bubbly. We're then going to add the flour on top of the water and yeast mixture and the salt on top of the flour. Now you'll just want to jump in and start squeezing the dough, scraping the sides, and just mixing everything the best that you can. Now the key to knowing when everything is well mixed is to be able to get your dough really, really stretchy. Now, if you can see here, I am pulling and stretching the dough and it's breaking off. That means that it needs a little bit more time. So continue to squeeze the dough, continue to mix the best that you can, and as soon as it gets really stretchy like this, it's done. Now I'm gonna go ahead and let this rest for about 30 minutes so that the flour can absorb some of that water. Now that our dough is done resting, we're gonna go ahead and start kneading our dough. Okay, before we start kneading our dough, we're gonna add a little bit of flour to our countertops. We're gonna turn our dough out of the bowl. And we're gonna knead by pushing our hands forward and pulling the dough back, quarter turn, push, quarter turn, push, fold back. We're going to do this same method for about 5 to 10 minutes until the dough has tightened up. Now that whole wheat flour soaks up a lot of the water that we added when we mixed the dough, so this dough isn't very hydrated, so you probably won't need very much flour when you are kneading this dough. In our walnuts and cranberries, and we want to start off with wet hands, and we're going to start off by stretching this out a little bit. What I'm going to do first is I'm just going to add all of the ingredients in here. Now the first time I folded in additional ingredients into my dough, I was very overwhelmed just by the texture. It's just very different than making regular bread. So the book describes as folding in these ingredients, and I didn't really know what that meant, but we're just gonna revert back to the technique that we learned in the no knead recipe in this book. We're gonna give this a couple sets of letter folds. So take it from this side, fold down to the middle, same from this side. And if some of the stuff starts falling out of the side, don't worry about it. We're going to do the same from this side, another letter fold. And if your hands are getting sticky to the dough, just wet them a little bit more. On this side, just like this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press everything out again. Again, this texture is going to feel a little bit strange. It's feeling like everything is evenly dispersed. It's in there pretty good. So we're gonna pop this into the bowl and it is going to rise for 3 hours and we will come back and check it then. So it's been about 3 hours. Let's go ahead and take a look at our dough. Right, here is what our dough looks like. It has obviously doubled in size. It is filled with air bubbles, and we are ready to go ahead and pre-shape our dough. Now before we start, we want to make sure that we have a little bit of flour on the countertops here. We're going to go ahead and turn this out of the bowl, and we want the top side down on the counter. So what we're trying to do here by pre-shaping this is develop some nice tension across the top of the loaf without tearing it. So what you want to do is kind of get the dough and fold it into itself underneath. You'll just want to continue to turn this until it has even tension across the top of the loaf. And you can use your dough scraper to do this as well, just by sliding it underneath the dough. Just make sure that you do this from all sides. Now if you have fruit that's popping out, don't worry about it. You can always take it, just slide it right back under the dough, and just fold it back in. Now that we have this pre-shaped, we're going to let this hang out on the counter and bench rest for about 30 minutes, and we will come back and get it shaped. All right, here is what our dough looks like after it's been bench resting. So we're going to go ahead and get this shaped. So I want to add a little bit of flour back here because I'm going to flip this over so I have a little bit of room to work with. Now we're going to do those same letter folds that we talked about earlier. So we're going to start from this side, pull it, fold it down to the middle. Same from the bottom. Same from this side. And same from this side. Just seal the dough to itself. Now I'm going to add a little bit more flour here. We're going to turn this over. And what we're going to do, that same thing, creating tension across the top of the loaf. So you can turn it, just cup your hands underneath, give your dough a few turns. Right, it should look something like this. Now it's time to proof, so we're going to take our proofing basket that has some flour in it, and we're going to let this proof seam side up for about an hour to an hour and a half. We will come back and check it then. So while our dough is proofing, we're going to go ahead and preheat our oven, and I'm also going to go ahead and preheat my Dutch oven as well. Now I know that may seem like a really long time to preheat your oven, but you really do want a super hot oven as well as a super hot Dutch oven so that it creates a lot of steam for your bread to rise. We'll come back and check our dough in about an hour until it is nice and pillowy and ready to be put in the oven. All right, our dough is done proofing. Here it is. I'm just going to do a couple pokes for you just so you can see how this is leaving an indent, and that's how you know it's done. So we're going to start by turning this out onto some parchment, seam side down, and I'm going to keep the score on this really simple since we have some stuff incorporated into the dough. I'm just going to do one line down the loaf. We're going to drop this directly into our hot Dutch oven, cover this up, and bake it with the lid on for about 25 minutes. After that, we'll take it out, remove the lid, and bake it for an additional 20 minutes. Here's what our bread looks like after 25 minutes, and here is what our bread looks like after cooking for an additional 20 minutes. Our bread has been resting for about 30 minutes. It smells so good in here, so let's go ahead and see how it tastes. The bread is so good. The walnuts add this really good crunchy texture without it being too crunchy, and the cranberries are giving it a really sweet flavor. I'm using a little bit of salted butter, and that is just rounding out the flavor perfectly. It is just so good. So if you're a cheese lover like me, you're definitely gonna wanna tune in next week because we are making a Parmesan and cracked black pepper loaf, and I am so excited. This is one of my favorite recipes in the book, so I am really excited to demonstrate that for you guys. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, be sure to subscribe, and thanks again for watching Doughin' It with Paigey. I'll see you guys next time. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Am I still on? Oh, okay. I'm gonna go ahead and say, we're gonna start, let's go ahead and start, okay. Let's go ahead and weigh out our ingredients. Hate it. Okay, so now I'm gonna say, was that good? Are you sure? Okay. I don't know what to say. What should I say? I have something I want to say, but it might be weird. You're gonna end up with a really tasty loaf.
Hopefully.
I'm gonna do that again. That's good. I'm gonna redo that last part. Freaking weirdo. Be sure to tune in next week. Are we doing that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.